Welcome to my budget deck channel, where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. And today I'm having a look at Crusadia, which was already featured in my limited one festival deck, so I decided to make one of this one. And first of all, since this is a budget deck profile, I will look over what you can play and what kind of cards you could cut if you want to play it like really cheap. If you want to try it out first, then there's some stuff you could cut in this specific deck that you don't have to definitely run at the start, but which will make the deck quite a lot better by splashing in like one or two ultras and a few super rares. First of all, the Utopia double package is something you do not have to run. It's neat. It has some usage because you can easily go into rank 4 with this specific deck. And also there's like a neat thing you can do with this if you have like a 2-3 card combo that can OTK through basically any opponent's monster, no matter how much attack points they have. So this is also quite a neat thing that you can do, which I'll be going over in a second. But you don't have to run it to start out. You can cut this, then cut double or nothing, and splash some other stuff into the extra deck if you like. You could also cut one Magius and cut one Equimax. It's not necessary that you run them both at 2. Every like third or fourth game it really comes up though that you want to go into the whole line again, because you can search stuff again and you can do certain things, and it is quite helpful. Also, if your opponent gets rid of stuff, you could go into it again. If you have like one Crusadia plus an extender, then that leads to the whole combo again. So running 2 of each is technically necessary, but if you just want to get a grasp of the deck, see if you actually like it or not, then it's fine if you start with the 1. If you just open some packs and drew one Magius and one Equimax and just want to try it out, that is also fine. And obviously the obligatory 1 Ash Blossom and now 1 Infinite Impermanence, because they're both in the set, so I don't really count them towards the whole count of ultra rares in this deck. You don't have to run them specifically. You can run any other card. If you want to focus more on going second, then you could put in go second cards. If you want to focus more on go first, then you can put on some kind of trap cards that do stuff for your deck. So in the end, you can substitute these. The problem is, if you have hand traps, it's good running them because it makes the deck playable going first and going second. So it balances the whole thing out a bit. So I like to include these because most people will have at least one of them. So I feel like having one in the deck isn't too bad. But you could obviously cut them for other stuff if you never bothered getting the special pack, or you just don't want to run hand traps. I fully understand. Starting out with the deck profile, 1 Ash Blossom, already talked about it, very good card, but can substitute this. Then the whole line of Crusadia cards. Not much to say, you just have to know what they kind of do and what level they are. That's like the important thing about this deck. Most of them are level 3s and there are some level 4s in this. This card can pop a card, which comes in handy with a different kind of cards that I'll be talking about in a second. This card protects your Crusadia monsters when it's in the graveyard, so that's quite nice. Plus it's a tuner, which in this variant doesn't come up at all really. It could, but it doesn't really have to. So you can keep that in mind if you want to go into a level 7 synchro monster. If you have a good one, you can play that in your extra deck, and it's not too hard to actually go into. FA Drawn Dragster, if you go first, comes to mind, but there's lots of other stuff you could be running. Leonis is the card that gives you monster piercing, so this is a neat card. You could technically, if you feel like you're lacking starters, you could play Rescue Cat and summon 2 Leonis, but it's kind of stupid because if it just opens you up to Ash Blossom, then you can't normal summon anything afterwards, so it's not really something I'd recommend doing. Then Crusadia Draco, one of the big cards of this deck, which I think is one of the cards that made it possible to be playing some kind of Dragon Link back in the days. Dragon Link Crusadia was like a thing for a while. I think it's mainly because of this card. It's level 4, so it helps going into rank 4s. It gets you a card back from your graveyard. The card that you get back with Draco, and mainly you want to search Draco off Magius, unless you can OTK and you want to have Maximus in your hand, for example. Then with Draco, you always have to remember which of the Crusadias did I normal summon to go into my Magius at the start, because then you add that back to your hand, and then you can still special summon from your hand. So this is like how you extend your combos, basically. So this card is very, very neat. Sadly, you only have 600 attack points, which for Crusadia actually matters. Crusadia Maximus, another level 4 monster. Weirdly, it's not a warrior, but it's a psychic type. A bit strange, but we take that. It's the card that gives you double damage for your monsters, but you have to watch out because you can target one Crusadia Link monster you control this turn. If it battles an opponent's monster, first of all, it's not direct attacks, which is a bit annoying. Any battle damage inflicted to your opponent is doubled. Also, another thing, other monsters you control cannot attack, which most of the time they won't be able to anyway because of the effect of Equimax, but this can be a thing that you have to keep an eye on, I'd say. Then next up, I want to call them Earth, Wind and Fire, but I decided to go for the Water one because it's a bit better than the Wind one in my opinion. The effects usually don't come up. The only one that could come up is the one of the Earth one, but since your Magius is spellcaster monster and you have to special summon an effect monster into its zone to get the effect off, you can easily run these because they special summon from your hand if you control spellcaster, so you can put them into the zone and they help you going into rank 4s, even though afterwards you don't want to use them to go into the link 2. You could leave them on board, then use a different card to go into the link 2 and then go into rank 4, or even if you have some other way to get a level 4 on board, then you could go into a rank 4. These cards, you don't technically have to run them, you could put in other cards, but I felt like they were cheap and also they worked quite well for what you're trying to do. You could run certain stuff with instant fusion, combos like Mud Dragon of the Swamp. Also, if you run instant fusion, you can run the Millennium Eyes Restrict, the one that protects you from hand traps. Hand traps can be quite problematic, so being able to run that would not be terrible either. So instant fusion is a target thing that you could be playing, but the targets are quite expensive. Instant fusion itself is quite expensive, not a card I would recommend for a budget deck, but if you have it anyway, then might as well run it. Cards to summon into the zones of your linked monsters, World Crown is one of them. It also has a good effect, so if you draw into it and you summon it at the end phase, well, with the end of your main phase, then you have a disruption for your opponent's turn, plus you boost your Equimax by 2,000 points, which is quite nice, and you can also summon it off of the trap card, which mainly you won't be doing, but you could. Also is kind of searchable in this deck, which is a bit funny. So I feel like at 2 this card is fine because you can only summon it with the effect once per turn. So I feel you don't want to max out on it, but you could if you really like to. Next up, Parallel Exceed, a card that easily goes into rank 4, easily triggers off your link monsters, and since you will be linking a lot of stuff with link arrows pointing down, this card is very, very helpful going first and going second, plus technically the attack point with 1,000 isn't too bad for your stuff like Equimax and so on as well, but you will be using this card to go into rank 4s no matter what. What you could run in this deck as well is Format Skipper, because it becomes a Crusadia monster. You can just make it be Spatha, for example, and then go into your Magius with it, and then search Exceed, which is quite neat because, well, obviously you can go into rank 4s. The problem with this is then the Draco effect doesn't really work that well because you cannot get Format Skipper back to your hand and then special summon it again from your hand. So the cards that you recycle with Draco will not be there. So you lose one extender, but you kind of gain another by getting Parallel Exceed to your hand. But if you start a Format Skipper and Parallel Exceed in your hand, it's a bit iffy sometimes. If you want, you can put 1 or 2 in if you feel like you need more play starters with your Crusadia, because you need to open with a Crusadia monster. If you don't, then that is very problematic. But you run a very big amount of Crusadia monsters. So it's like 16 I think in total, because you also have reinforcement of the army, so you should be starting with the Crusadia monster like most of the time. So technically you don't need Format Skipper, but if you have one, might as well put 1 in if you like. Next up to Kaijus, because this deck can go second quite easily. Kaijus you can place in front of your Crusadia monster, so it boosts the attack points, which is quite neat in this deck. So I decided to go for this one. You could also run the rank 4 Exosister Xyz monster if you like, because then you can technically give your Kaijus back to your hand. You could put it over one of your opponent's monster, use the attack boost to attack into one of your opponent's other monsters, and then give the Kaiju back to your hand, so you have one for the next turn, for example. Is a play that you could be doing, but didn't feel like including it because in testing it like never came up, so it didn't really matter all that much. Monster Reborn, very good extender for the deck, and you get this card for free, so it's not an ultra you actually have to spend money on. Same for Reinforcement of the Army, free card, and it searches your Arboria, so you have at least another copy of this card in the deck, which is protection. So it's like, I would say it's the second or third most important Crusadia in this deck. They all do stuff. I felt like the piercing damage comes up the least amount of times, but the protection is actually quite neat, especially because your boss monster will be your link monster, and it's quite nice that your opponent can't just Raigeki and oops, it's gone. So Arboria actually matters, so it's quite nice that you can reinforcement that card. World Legacy Succession, a card that you can also get for free. You get it in the solo mode, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Gift of the Murder. If you play into the World Legacy story, then you will get this card for free, so you do not have to invest into this card, which is quite nice. And since you play such a link heavy deck, this card in general is quite very good, and it is searchable. Triple Forbidden Chalice, because this card is good going first and going second. You can disrupt your opponent, you can bait out your opponent's negates, so this is very, very neat. double or nothing for the Utopia double combo. And the thing that I was talking about with the Utopia double and the combo is even if you draw this card, it's not a dead card in this specific deck, because then you can just go into Utopia, not into Utopia double, and then you have it under Equimax, and you can use the Utopia effect to stop Equimax's attack, then use double or nothing on Equimax, which is very, very good because this card will at least have 4,500 attack. Then even if you put Utopia double under it, it's only the combined original attack of all monsters. So if you have Utopia double that has 5,000 attack points, it does nothing for Equimax, so this wouldn't work. But you could obviously get double damage. This is the combo with Maximus. So if you attack into one of your opponent's monsters, even if they have like 4,000 attack, it doesn't matter because you will boost the attack up to 9,000 and then do double damage as well with this. So you will do tons of damage with this like smallish kind of combo, which is quite neat actually. So you can like go into Maximus if you have another level 4 monster to go into rank 4, use Maximus effect on Equimax, then go into Utopia / Utopia double, go for the combo, and then you can run down any of your opponent's monsters, which is very neat because if you replace them with a Kaiju, you have loads of attack and you can finish your opponent every time if they don't have like an effect to stop you at this point. So this is a combo that I like very much. It doesn't come up every game, but it comes up a lot of times, so I felt like really including this. It does a lot, and this is the only ultra you'd have to craft that you actually need in this deck, so I felt it was fine. Triple Crusadia Power. This is your power play against hand traps, because your Crusadia monster is unaffected by card effects this turn. It's a bit annoying because it's unaffected by all cards effect except its own, which is problematic because also if you use this on stuff like Equimax, then Maximus and Leonis don't work anymore because it doesn't say only your opponent's card effects, which it should have in my opinion. It's all of them, so you have to watch out with this a tiny bit. Also doesn't work for the attack boost then that you can get, and there's a lot of annoying stuff, but overall it really protects your monsters and it's quite a good card, so I would run it at 3. If you have Called by the Grave, you could decide maybe run Called by the Grave twice and only one Crusadia Power if you like. Up to you, but this card is cheaper, so I decided that would be a better inclusion. Crusadia Testament is technically a card you can just like shotgun at the start of your turn, so your opponent can't respond to your Crusadia effects, which isn't bad, but I felt like it bricked up my hand a bit, and if I used it, then I mainly used it for actually going for the draw 3, which is very strong in this kind of deck as well. Since this card is searchable, I felt like 1 is fine. You could play it at 3 if you really like to, but you'd have to cut a lot of other cards, and I felt like Power is still better than Testament, so I left it the way it was, and I left it at 1 because you need lots of the other cards. But in theory, you could play 3 of this card if you like. Already talked about Impermanence. You can play basically anything. If you want to focus on going first, then you could also play a Trap Tricks of Reflegia and run 1 or 2 trap holes that you could be using with it instead. So that is also a thing you could be doing. Another card that is very, very crucial for the going first strategy of this deck. This deck can go first and go second, which is why I like it quite a lot. The going second technically is a lot better, but if you play a budget variant, going second decks always struggle because these days to go second you need these very go second heavy cards, and a lot of them aren't even that good. Dark Ruler No More, for example, in this deck isn't great because you can't finish your opponent, which is obviously not what you want to be doing with an OTK deck. And then you just need lots of hand traps so your opponent doesn't put up like a crazy board that stops you in your tracks, because this deck doesn't play that well through disruption. So I felt it's nice to have a way to go first that actually works, and Crusadia Vanguard is one of these things that make it work, because you can add this card to your hand. If you have a Crusadia World Legacy then on your board at the end of the turn, which you mainly will have, you can tribute it during your opponent's turn, then special summon that Reclusia, and Reclusia can pop this card and one of your opponent's cards, so you have a disruption, and then you still have the negate with Equimax because you still have Reclusia on board and contribute it for the effect of Equimax and then negate one of your opponent's card effects. So you have like basically 2 disruptions by just searching this card out during your turn with Regulex. So that's quite nice, which gets us to Crusadia Krawler as well. Krawler is technically not a very good card, as the stats are abysmal because they're after like I think Krawler Spine, if I'm not mistaken. It's not great, but first of all it searches you a World Legacy card, which is either this one or obviously your spell extender for the next turn, which is quite nice. And you have another card in your zone for Equimax, and if you draw into Vanguard, that's quite nice because you get the surge, then you contribute Krawler to Vanguard and then get like either your crown out, but mostly you would get Reclusia out depending on who you play against. and that's not too bad. So if you draw into Vanguard, you don't have to search it, then you can search Krawler, because you'd rather search Krawler than Power most of the time. So you can do this kind of small combo. It's not perfect, but it's okay. Like, it's playable, but go in second, this card is kind of dead. So technically you don't have to run it. I played around a bit with running World Chalice, because this card also can banish itself the next turn and search your World Legacy card, but you can get this card off your hand. But with Krawler you can at least set it and it does something other than like nothing. To the extra deck, I run one Psychic Life Transfer, because technically Maximus is a Psychic monster, so you could heal yourself up if you wanted to. Obviously, if you have better level 7s, run them. Zeta is a card that's cheaper, you could be running, but most of the level 7 synchros, the good ones, are gate kept by the fact that they're super rare or ultra rare, and you don't really need them, so I decided to not include an expensive one. Already talked about Utopia Double, it's a very, very nice combo. Some rank 4s that you can be playing that aren't terrible for what you're trying to achieve. Bagooska is technically a nice card, it just suffers from the problem that you force your opponent's monsters into defense position, and that can be annoying if you want to OTK them the next turn, because then you have to have Leonis to actually go for damage, which is a bit problematic from time to time. But yeah, it's a card you can be playing. Obviously you could be playing Abyss Dweller instead, even Giant Hand if you like. Tornado Dragon is a card that comes to mind. Time Thief Redoer isn't terrible. Steel Swarm Roach isn't terrible. All these like generic rank 4s that do stuff during opponent's turn. Technically you could be playing Firewall Exceed Dragon, because it interacts with your Link monsters, which you will have. And then if you run a Link 4 Cybers Link monster, which you could by running Topologic Bomber Dragon and Mekk-Knight Crusadia Equimax, you could summon them back with Exceed Dragon. It's a very convoluted way to play this deck, but you could, if you're into stupid stuff, you could be playing it if you actually like. Then the Crusadias, they're very important. It's like just climbing through, Link climbing through to the Equimax. You basically don't use Spatha, but technically you could to move one of your opponent's monsters to a zone where you would want it to be. It's not bad, but it's also not good. So if you want to replace a card, you could replace this. At least one of them you can easily replace. 2 is probably fine as well. You could replace 1 Regulex if you like, if you're feeling you need more extra deck space, and 2 Equimax. This card OTKs, but the cards that it points to cannot attack, which is something you just have to keep in mind. Don't be baited into, oh yeah, I have game on board, and then remember you cannot actually do it. Plus it's an effect negation kind of, which is very good. Like, it works for trap cards, works for spell cards, works on monster effects, but they have to be on board obviously to work. So like, you can't negate hand traps or anything, because it's not really a negate, it's like a negate on board kind of thing. So keep that in mind. Other cards you could be running: Maxi, very good cards. All the Xyz rank 4s that you could be playing. You could technically play Prime Math Mech Alambertian and search out Math Mech Induction, but would obviously have to play another brick, which isn't great. But this card is also an disruption, plus your Equimax is actually Cyber's monster, so it would have 500 attack more, which isn't terrible. But yeah, I would not recommend playing this, but in theory, if you like to, you could, because then you can add one Math Mech card from your deck to your hand, which would be this one. You can then send one this face-up card from the field to the graveyard to target one card your opponent controls, so it's very nice. You only have to control a Math Mech monster, which you would with Alambertian, so technically you could, but you would add another brick to your deck, which isn't great. Happy Feather Duster, very good card, go in second. If you want a card that's more versatile, Twin Twister is fine. The discard doesn't hurt you too much, it's not great, but it is doable. You could play Pot of Desires if you want to get rid of the Utopia double combo especially. Then Pot of Desires at like, even at 1 or 2 isn't too bad, because you kind of want to use it after you've comboed, since Pot of Desires lets you do that, which is why a lot of people don't like this card. It has no real restrictions beside banishing. You can use all your combos, so like, you search all the stuff you want to search that you don't want to banish, and then at the end of the turn you use Pot of Desires to actually like extend your plays, hopefully draw into more cards that you can special summon from your hand, and then actually push for game or get a better setup. So this card isn't actually terrible. You could easily run this at 2 or 3 in the deck if you like, but it's obviously not cheap and you don't need it, so I did not want to include it. Another card you could be running is a Pot of Avarice. Shuffling 5 cards back to draw 2 cards isn't actually that hard, because if you link climbing and everything, you will be having at least 4 cards in your graveyard by the end of the turn, mainly 5, so that's fine. A card that I decided not to run is Crusadia Revival, because it just only helps go in second, and Sometimes it's helpful, it's searchable, but it can brick your hand as well. It can work because you could pop it technically with Reclusia, so that's kind of nice sometimes if you go second and you want to use Reclusia's effect and not pop itself. So this could be a thing. Other than that, I felt like it wasn't overly good, so I decided to not run it. And that's basically the whole deck. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. Let me know in the comments and hope you're having a good day.